Society has socialized us to experience this state 3 times. What is it? Hunger. Is there anyone in this room who has never experienced hunger? What makes this area of charity different is that we have all experienced hunger. And matters are worse here in Richmond. You see, you can numb pain, you can numb stress, you can numb emotions, but you can't numb the pangs of hunger, at least not for long. In Richmond, represented here by the green bars, we outdo both Virginia and the United States in our at-risk groups. This is important. 2010 census data showed that we had enough of a food insecure population and environment to be considered a food desert. Now, what is a food desert? Well, it's exactly how it seems. A food desert is an area where it's hard to get access to sustainable food at all times. Now, Richmond, as we all know it, is such a food-loving culture. Our own culture revolves around food. We have restaurant weeks, we have festivals and everything, yet we still are a food desert. So last October, in 2015, the Richmond Times-Dispatch published an article noting that Richmond was ranked 3rd in the nation for the most grocery stores per capita. 3rd. Now, per capita means per heads of person. So we have a high grocery store to resident ratio, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all the grocery stores and sustainable food sources are evenly spaced out. You can see here that census data has been the majority method for identifying food insecure areas, such as here in Richmond. However, they can often be underrepresented in areas where people tend to move in or out, since by the time census data is collected, the population at the time may not be representative of what's been happening in the area for the past 5 or 10 years, or even in the past year. So you can see here that the areas filled in by purple are high food insecure areas, and low to moderate food insecure areas are outlined in purple. They seem pretty specific, but is that all of them? Because this is just according to census data. As you can see, the area inside the 2 black circles represent VCU's 2 campuses, and they don't seem that food insecure. But I know students every day who struggle with getting food. These students, faculty, and staff here at VCU are so smart and capable, yet they still struggle with the basic necessity of trying to get food. Now, I know what you're probably imagining. You're probably imagining that college student in the grocery store with that huge carton of ramen noodles, going home and eating ramen noodles every day. Well, yes, I am talking about those students, but I'm also extending it to a group that struggles far beyond that. I'm involved with VCU Ram Pantry, the student food pantry on campus, and here is one user's situation. My mom had food stamps but didn't use it wisely. She passed away recently. I do have 4 jobs, but they are all seasonal. I've been using my money to pay the bills at my mom's house until it is sold. I need help getting food. Between my boyfriend and I, we barely have enough money to buy food. Now, Ram Pantry's creation didn't involve any census data at all. It came from an internal interest and an internal investigation. Our faculty advisors and health staff found that the most concern among students and the people they were treating were learning how to, or struggling how to balance school, bills, work, and food. And eventually the university as a community noticed. So within 1 year since Ram Pantry started in 2013, we went from operating from an off-campus ministry house on the 3rd floor with no shelves at all to operating in a wheelchair-accessible VCU facility with shelves. What's interesting is that when we first started, all our faculty sponsors and advisors reached out to the numerous food sources around VCU, or around Richmond for that matter. You can imagine that they had a great variety of menu to choose from grocery stores, since we are ranked 3rd in the nation for the most grocery stores. And you can also imagine the presence that these grocery stores have in our weekly food festivals that Richmond has every summer. However, out of that entire population that makes Richmond ranked 3rd in the nation, only one major food source agreed to sponsor Ram Pantry. As evidence of our progress and the growing food desert issue, since it is increasing, we've almost doubled our usage within the past year at Ram Pantry. This comes from marketing to food insecure students, faculty, and staff. We train our volunteers to make clients our first priority in the pantry, such that only 1 or 2 clients are checked out at a time in the most efficient manner. One user tells us, although I received the federal Pell Grant in the full amount, among other academic scholarships, I still have to work 2 part-time jobs and live at home to cover the expense of college. I'm glad that I don't have to rely solely on myself anymore. Ram Pantry will really help. Now, I'm not food insecure, but I have experienced hunger, as has everyone else in this room. Now, no matter how small of a commonality that may be, that provides some sort of platform, some common ground for which you can project empathy onto someone in need. So being in the pantry, sitting down, listening to the users struggle and their worries about where their next meal is going to come from, that creates some sort of connection with that empathy. And now, what's the most amazing thing of all is that our clients are coming back and asking to be trained as volunteers in order to staff the pantry and keep it going. So you see, when you demonstrate that there is a need, and then you create a non-judgmental environment to service that need, people feel free and comfortable to come and take for themselves and give back to others. And since we also serve VCU faculty and staff, we also train them to volunteer alongside our students. So in essence, the entire community gets involved. Another user says, I have spent all of my paychecks paying off school and buying minimal groceries. I have to learn to eat less so that my food can last longer. It's pretty cool to see an interaction between a volunteer and a client in the pantry, with the volunteer saying, hey, I know where you've been. I'm in that same boat too. I'm struggling too, and I think we're going to be okay. It's that kind of dialogue that dispels the stigma against getting help from charities, especially food charities. So when we think about stigma, we often think about the haves versus the have-nots, and them being separate groups. But here's another layer to this concept. Oftentimes, it's the people who need help the most who isolate themselves. And this isn't because they don't know, it's because they've been socialized in such a way that we all go through life pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps. So in other words, we solve our problems on our own, by ourselves, without any outside help. And this can create fear of criticism and judgment for simply telling the truth about your situation. Many students or many users in the pantry simply did not know that they could get help in the pantry. A big problem, or a big portion of people who can but decide not to receive help, is because they may feel vulnerable or powerless. So imagine that you are in need of food, or you are in need of emergency food. So in going to a charity to get food, perhaps you might feel that you're giving up some power, or admitting that you no longer have the power over your next meal. And this can become and feel so isolating, especially here in Richmond, where our culture revolves around food. We have numerous restaurant weeks, numerous food festivals throughout the seasons, and that is something that no one should have to feel. You see, the problem is not that we just live in a food desert, in a culture that happens to love food, and in a city that happens to be ranked super high on having the most grocery stores and an incredibly skewed distribution of grocery stores. No, the problem is also that we set up these charities with the mindset thinking, yeah, I'm going to save the world in this cause. All I have to do is build an institution to service a need and just exist. And people will come to me like magnets. That's not the case. So we set up these charities, and we assume that the people who need help either A, know they need help, and B, are willing to receive the help. These aren't valid assumptions. So we need to normalize Everyone needs help sometimes, and this is no exception. Telling the food insecure that, hey, given the circumstances, given your situation, this might be totally normal, and this might be okay sometimes. And telling them that food insecurity doesn't have to define a person, especially socially. And telling them that it's okay not to be okay sometimes. And then we need to educate. It is so, so crucial not only to reach out to your target population, but also to those who you think might potentially be your target population. Like I've said before, so many users in the pantry just didn't know that they were eligible before we reached out to them. Two things to get talking about are food insecurity and food desert. Now, please don't waste this talk. I'm just one messenger and one advocator for this issue, but you all can make these topics so well discussed that it's the common topic that pops up around the dinner table. So the formal definition for food insecurity is not being able to have access to food, sustainable food, at all times. And it comprises of three components. The first one being food access. Are you able to physically get to a place to get the food? The second one is food availability. Is there actually a food source nearby that provides the sustainable food that you need? And the third is food use or food means. Now, financial means, the top reason for food insecurity, falls under this category, as well as living without certain materials, such as a kitchen. If you're lacking in any one of these three, you are considered food insecure if you can't sustain yourself. And then there's a food desert. So think about the climate in a food desert. It's hot and almost uninhabitable. Imagine that every plant is a grocery store. So in a desert, it's oftentimes barren, the plants are sporadically spaced out, and it's often hard to get to them. That's a food desert. And that's what we're living in. Oops. So VCU provides this amazing educational system in the middle of the city, in the middle of this food-loving city, to educate this amazing group of large, diverse college students. So what better way to start the conversation than to talk to them? But we all know that with teaching, we need applicable examples. How can we effectively teach food sustainability when we can't even sustain ourselves as a community? When the nearest major food source between both MCV and the Monroe Park campus is Kroger. And even that can be a walk or a hike sometimes in this chilly weather. So let's turn to our resources. For example, what are our rooftops being used for right now? They provide a valuable resource for community food gardens on roofs. And VCU has already taken the first step in that. They've created 2 community food gardens, one on each campus. These gardens serve as a valuable educational resource, not only to teach students how to eat healthy, but also how to sustain themselves. So let's constantly be questioning how to solve this problem of being a food desert and being a foodie-loving city, and also being ranked 3rd in the nation for the most grocery stores. It's not about what I'm going to do, it's not about what you're going to do, it's about what everyone as a community is going to do about it. I think that if you eat, you're in. Now, and this isn't some rare illness, it isn't some contagious epidemic for which we have no cure for or for which vaccines have run out. So the next time your dining companion doesn't finish their food or is reluctant on doing so, instead of saying something like, hey, you know, there are people halfway around the globe who could benefit from that food. Maybe a message that hits closer to home is, hey, there are people here who could benefit from that food. Thank you.